The most important thing you need to know about this game is it's all about clarity. Every seemingly new animatronic, every new minigame, it all connects back to something from the past. No stone is left unturned. This is how it all ends. So let's once again run through the basics of what happens during this game. Set in 2023, after Fazbear Frights is burned to the ground, a new Fazbear's Pizzeria seems to open out of the blue. You, as the player, are now the manager of this new pizzeria, hence this game's name, Pizzeria Simulator. But at the end of each night, our employer also tasks us with salvaging the animatronics that show up outside of the building, telling us to make sure that they are all within the building by the end of the week. Doing so results in the canon ending, where your employer reveals that the building has been a trap for the animatronics since the beginning, luring them with familiar smells and sounds. A literal pizzeria simulator. And ultimately, the animatronics, our employer, and us all burn. The remaining souls within the animatronics are released, and it all finally ends. We are once again not told who we're playing as, but given how we've been playing as the same guy in the past 5 games, as well as our employer saying,
"Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be."
Come on, you know who it is. So then who are all of these new animatronics? Well, don't forget, this game is about clarifying. No more new characters are being introduced, meaning that we've come across all of these animatronics before. The most obvious one, of course, being Scraptrap, aka Springtrap after he survived the fire of Fazbear Frights. Next up, Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy. Last time we saw them, they were one and the same in the form of Ennard, but because of some old dispute, they decided to split ways with Baby. Why they chose to do this is a bit unclear, but ultimately it doesn't matter because they both die anyway. And finally, there's Lefty. This seemingly random new bear is actually holding the puppet within it. We can see the puppet's arms sticking out through the shell in one of the secret images, as well as there being a blueprint for Lefty showing off how capturing the puppet is its primary function. We even learn the names of the other children possessing the animatronics. Freddy is possessed by Gabriel, Bonnie is possessed by Jeremy, Chica is possessed by Susie, and Foxy is possessed by Michael. Wait a minute. Foxy is possessed by Fritz? That can't be right. I thought we solved this already. Fritz Smith was the alibi name, and then Mike Schmidt was his real name. Well, at least the Michael part was. And isn't this game all about clarification? For as ludicrous as it sounded, I'm pretty sure the whole Michael being a robot thing was intentional. So what exactly is being clarified with this information? Well, here's the twist. We weren't wrong. MikeBot is the result of putting Michael Afton back together, but I was wrong to call the older brother Michael. In reality, the one who got bit, the crying child himself, that is Michael Afton. But since we know that this robotic replica of him was designed to resemble his father, as well as, according to my timeline, going by the name Fritz Smith before he even enters the bunker, it seems to imply that even though MikeBot was built to replace the son that he lost, Mr. Afton decided to put him to a new purpose, making this machine believe that he was actually Fritz, Michael's older brother. But it's only after the events of Sister Location that MikeBot realizes who he truly is. And do you know what piece of evidence confirms this theory? In possibly the biggest twist yet, this info comes from a book. Yeah, remember when I said the books aren't canon? What I should have actually said is that none of the novels are canon, because the one book that actually is canon to the series is the security logbook. Throughout this unassuming children's activity book are a constant string of questions asking who you are, what's your name, do you remember your name? And on the inside cover we see that this book belonged to Mike. Everything that's written or drawn in red pen was by him. There's drawings of Nightmare Fredbear, there's questions about the party from FNAF 4, asking if psychic friend Fredbear still talks to you. These are all things that Michael Afton is very familiar with. So it's obviously him But then why the constant questions asking who you are? And most interestingly, of course, is the fact that Mike's name, written in red, is also struck out in red. Because in truth, Mike has no idea what he is. He genuinely believed that he was Fritz Smith, but after his experience in the bunker, he suddenly realized he was a machine built to replace a completely different person. That's why he has his own name written down as Mike, and yet also scratched it out. He may be Mike's replacement, but he's not the real Mike, is he? So I should probably now also mention the other missing kid that we supposedly see in this game too. In the Fruity Maze minigame, we see a girl that everyone seems to believe is Susie. But do you know what character in the games she looks like? It's the girl from the playground in FNAF 4. Blonde hair, blue eyes, red ribbon, pink shirt. Again, the design similarities are there, but why is this random child suddenly important to the story? Well, it's not really her that this minigame is supposed to highlight. It's really about the dog. Remember back in part 4 when I said it used to be all a dream? Details like the finger trap doll explaining Springtrap, the kid with the balloon explaining Balloon Boy, the Foxy plush having his head ripped off explaining why he's always out of order, and of course there's the toys that this child is playing with, explaining the toy animatronics, including why Toy Chica was missing her beak. But now, since the events of FNAF 1, 2, and 3 are no longer dreams, these details don't really take on a second meaning. The finger trap doll is just a finger trap. The kid with a balloon is just a kid with a balloon. The only one of these details in the FNAF 4 minigames that doesn't have an explanation is the mangle. Since we know for a fact that these minigames take place in 1983, that puts us 4 years before Fazbear's The Second opens, before the mangle should even exist. And this is what I propose happened to the dog. When Afton says he's not really dead, he's showing the child how he resurrected the dog using the mangle. Oh, and I should point out, this isn't the actual mangle from Fazbear's The Second. This minigame actually goes out of its way to show a sense of scale between plushies, toys, animatronics. So based on that, we can tell that this isn't the mangle animatronic, but is something much smaller, likely to the scale of a dog. And yeah, okay, I found my own way of explaining this minigame, but what does that clarify? It shows us the moment when Mr. Afton discovered that he can resurrect souls using the animatronics, which puts him on the path to put his son back together. This next point is the main reason why I chose to make this series. Unlike every other reveal that I've had, this is the one I feel the most confident about. It's what got me to rethink the entire series from the start. We as a fandom have collectively been trying to figure out the meaning behind Later That Night ever since this game came out. And for every solution we've come to, there's always been a catch. Something that doesn't quite make sense, and the whole theory comes undone. And I'm not about to act as if you don't have to squint real hard in a few places for my own theory to make sense. But the one thing about these other theories that they all have in common is that they stem from the idea that the yellow guy is Mr. Afton. But the theory that I propose is that the yellow guy was never Mr. Afton, but instead, the yellow guy is Henry. But in order for me to explain why, we must turn our attention to Gravity Falls. Chances are, if you're into theorizing about FNAF, then you've probably already seen it, but still, I'm going to do my best to not spoil it. In the show, there is a character who often talks about their backstory. When this character does talk about their backstory, that character is shown wearing white. Except on one occasion where that character is shown wearing black, which may not seem like it's all that important, but it ended up being one of the earliest clues to one of the biggest mysteries of the entire show. That mystery being that the character wearing white and the character that was wearing black are actually polar opposites. So the white and black, the opposite colors, was an early clue to that mystery. And this is how it links back to FNAF. Mr. Afton and Henry couldn't be more different. Afton is a serial killer who shows little to no regard for his own children, whereas Henry is a loving father who deeply cares and mourns for the one child he lost. Afton has been famously represented by the color purple, and when we look at a basic color wheel, we can clearly see that the direct polar opposite of the color purple is yellow. For this final point that I'm going to make during this series of videos, I am going to recount the entirety of Henry's story. Because he's been here since the beginning. It's something that I've been hinting to as far back as FNAF 2. He's the owner of Fredbear's Family Diner.
We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that.
He's the one in FNAF 3 that the phone dude contacts.
We're trying to track down a good lead right now. Some guy who helped design one of the buildings says it was like an extra room that got boarded up.
And of course, in FNAF 4, he is the one who is speaking in yellow text. Remember, once again, FNAF 6 is all about clarification. Henry isn't some new character brought in at the very last minute. He plays an integral role in the story, one that is heavily intertwined with the beginning of Afton's story, where all of the early dominoes are put in place for the events of the entire series. So now, with all of the information from the previous games, let's run through the story of FNAF one final time. Fazbear's Entertainment is established in 1973. A few years later, Mr. Afton decides to open up his own pizzeria, Circus Baby's Pizza World. He buys the lot next to his home to set up the restaurant and builds the underground bunker. He attempts to sell the restaurant to Fazbear Entertainment, but the deal goes sour when his daughter Elizabeth is killed by Circus Baby, forcing him to shut down the restaurant. Meanwhile, a fellow animatronic entrepreneur named Henry is also trying and failing to get his own animatronic restaurant off the ground. He may not have had the most sophisticated animatronics, but the designs definitely captured the imagination of his daughter. But if he wanted to support his daughter as a single parent, he was going to need something that worked. And one day, at a nearby bar, he came across a man who was in the same situation as him. Afton wouldn't have been too keen to share the exact details of why his restaurant failed, but in the end, they had a clear goal. Afton was the expert in animatronics, and Henry would be able to appeal to the kids, and with their combined skill sets, they had a chance to rival Fazbear Entertainment themselves by creating Fredbear's Family Diner, built upon the same lot that Circus Baby's Pizza World once was. And it worked. Fredbear's Diner was not only a success, but it thrived, to the point where they even collaborated with Fazbear Entertainment on a TV show. But Henry was still a single parent. He needed a way to look after his daughter while he was working. And so he created the security puppet, one that would respond to the wristband that Henry's daughter was instructed to always wear. And Mr. Afton? He had his own ulterior motives as well. But he wasn't going to be able to execute his plan as long as Henry's daughter was around. Henry he could deal with, but Henry's daughter, she was always thinking. She could go anywhere, and she reminded him all too much of his own daughter Elizabeth. So on one night, when Henry was away, Afton drives up and kills Henry's daughter. Henry has lost his daughter, and Michael Afton witnessed it. Henry has no idea that Afton murdered his daughter, but with how suddenly terrified of the restaurant his son has gotten, he grows increasingly suspicious of him. And so he gives the crying child the Fredbear plush, both to comfort him and to keep an eye on him. Henry knows that Michael Afton knows something about his daughter's disappearance. He's just not sure what, and he'll never find out. The crying child is bit, and later dies of his injuries in hospital. The loss of another child in the Afton household is enough for Mr. and Mrs. Afton to divorce. And since his older brother Fritz is the reason that Michael has died, Mrs. Afton can't bear the sight of him. And so, Fritz is forced out to live with his father. Henry, still not realizing that Afton was the one behind his daughter's disappearance, takes pity on his friend and allows him and his son to stay with him in his home. Henry knows what it's like to lose a child and presumes that Mr. Afton will grieve the same way he did, but instead, he doesn't. He convinces Henry that if he helps him, he can use his robotic genius to rebuild his lost son. Henry is disturbed by the idea, but he goes along with it for the sake of his friend, regardless of how he personally feels about it. But Afton would regret ever bringing Henry down to the bunker, because on one day, when Henry is down in the bunker alone, he discovers exactly who Afton truly is. He discovers that Afton has been spying on his family home. He finds the Fredbear plush that he'd been using to communicate with Michael, but most importantly, he learns the horrifying story of how Afton's daughter was killed by Circus Baby, a machine that Afton himself had designed. A story Circus Baby would go on to tell Mike as well.
There is a space under the desk. Someone before you crafted it into a hiding place, and it worked for him.
Suddenly, it all clicks into place. Afton was behind everything. He'd been lying to Henry from the start, and this infuriated him. So he rushes back to his house, hoping to find him there, but by the time he gets back, Afton has broken out of his room, running off to that place again, undoubtedly the bunker. With the undeniable footprints of Spring Bonnie by the bushes, it's clear that Afton's plan has been set in motion. The missing children's incident was about to begin, and Henry was going to be blamed for it. But, as we know from the newspapers from FNAF 1, Henry isn't convicted and therefore doesn't go to prison. Yet it is still a massive blow to Fazbear Entertainment, who are forced to shut down Fazbear's Pizza. A small victory for Afton, for the time being, but he has no intentions of stopping. Once Fazbear Entertainment opens their second restaurant, Afton goes on another killing spree. But this time, the children aren't missing. Their bodies are left scattered around the building for all to see. And this time, he would guarantee that Henry would go to prison, because this time, he wasn't going to use the Spring Bonnie suit. He was going to use the Fredbear suit. Fredbear's endoskeleton may be down in the bunker, but the mascot costume, that's nowhere to be seen. And this is the reason why. So once again, Henry seems the guilty one, and for all of this to occur during the investigation of FNAF 2, he is arrested once again, suspected of murder. With Afton now in hiding, and the police being even more suspicious of Henry, Henry takes the fall for a crime he didn't commit, which is why he is not around during the events of FNAF 1. But in that time, Afton, the phone guy, and Fazbear Entertainment are no more. And at the same time, Mike has failed to find his father, and it wouldn't be for another 30 years before both Henry and Mike's stories would pick up once again. The owners of Fazbear Frights contacts Henry, hoping that his knowledge and history with the brand can allow them to find a real animatronic for their horror attraction. But after it burns shortly after opening, Henry decides to put an end to all of it. He returns to a familiar old building, left forgotten by the world, Fredbear's Family Diner, back to where it all began, redesigning the entire building to be the perfect trap for any possessed animatronics remaining, along with designing an animatronic uniquely created to capture the puppet, which Henry believed contained the soul of his daughter. And it worked. Afton, Ennard, Lefty, all of them had been successfully lured to this building, along with another wandering lost soul, one that would aid Henry in his efforts, and together the remaining lost souls were set free, with both Henry and Mike choosing to stay behind, to go out like the rest of them, finally at peace. And that's it. The end. The end to the original story, that is, because of course there are plenty more FNAF games to talk about. And I will, in time. But for right now, I want to say to everyone who decided to spend the 10-year anniversary of this series watching the end of my little series of videos, thank you so much.